This is stage 1, Hunter's Pond Reverse of Sandblast 2014.
How long is it?
7.97 miles.
And in front of us is Greg Healy.
Uh-huh.
In the Datsun.
Hey guys! Hey! Thank you. Of course. Thanks, guys. Thanks for working as always. We are armed. Off at 10:10. Seconds. We're looking at a left 4 plus, long, open 70, right 5 plus. 10 seconds. Don't roll.
At least don't roll.
4, 3, 2, 1, go! Left 4 plus long, open 70. Right 5 plus. Left 6, 50. Right 6 into left 6 extra long, 70. Left 5 over crest into right 5 plus, very long, tighten 5 minus, off camber. Go, go, go!
This is very long?
Yep.
Tightens what?
Off camber. Triangle.
Yep.
Slow, slow, slow. Go. Left 5 plus. Right 5 soft. Into caution turn, left 4 over crest, tighten slippy. Right 5, no cut, 50. Slippy. Into right 4 plus, open tighten 5 plus. 180. Right 6 over small crest long, 350. Right 5 minus, very long soft. Go, go, go. Left 6 plus over small crest, 150. Left 5 into small crest. Into right 5 minus, very long over small crest. Into left 5. Into small crest into right 5, no cut. Into left 6, tighten 5 minus, soft, over crest, right 6, long, into break, long, small crest, left 4, minus, soft, long, no cut, open, tighten, 5 minus. Right 4, open, tighten, 5 minus, very long. Left 6, tighten 4 plus, slippy.
Tightens 4?
4 plus, slippy.
Sorry, that was best up.
Right 5 plus, 150. Go, go, go. Left 4, late, long, stay out, 70. Right 5 minus soft, 50. Left 5, tighten 4 over big crest, long. right 4, long, soft, no cut, open, into turn right 5, over small crest, soft, deceptive, repeat, soft, deceptive, right 5, go, go, go. 120, left 6 plus, into right 6 plus, into left 6, right 3 plus, over small crest, open, deceptive, 100. Right 6, 50, left 5 minus, open tighten 5, open tighten 4 plus. Right 3 plus. Left 3 plus over small crest.
This is our turn.
Yep. Right 5 minus into left 4 over small crest. Into right 4.
Next.
Caution, turn right 2 plus over crest, stay in. 120. Left 5 minus, tighten 4 minus. Into left 6 short over crest and right 5 short. Left 5 minus short. Kinks 120. Stay left over crest 40. Right 5 plus short. Left 5 plus. Into stay left over crest 120. Water. Caution, small crest, into water, into left 3 plus. Small crest, into right 5. Left 6 over small crest. Into right 5 plus short, 120. Turn left 1 plus. Repeat, turn left 1 plus. Left 5 plus, right 4 minus, 70. Right 5 minus. Into left 4 plus, very long, 100. Small crest 40. Left 5 plus. Right 5 plus, tighten 4, long. Left 4 minus. Right, turn right 5 minus over small crest long. Left 6, 50. Caution, right 5 soft, tighten 4 minus long. 70. Left 4 late, 50. Right 5. Into crest, into right 6. Left 4 plus extra long. Small crest 50. Right 6. Left 5 long, open over small crest. Into turn left 4. Turn left 4. Left 5. 50. Right 5 minus soft over small crest, very long. Open tighten 4, soft. 200. Caution, small crest, into turn right 4 minus, 350. Turn right 4 minus, 250. 5 plus. Over crest, down, extra long, 100.
Repeat.
Right 5 plus, over crest, down, extra long, 100. Go, go, go. Right 5. Left 6, long, over small crest, 250. Don't lift to end. Left 6, over crest, 180. You're lifting.
Shut up.
Right 6 plus, over small crest, 50, into finish, 250. Nope, that was it. You're done.
I know, I'm trying. Ooh, good calling, by the way.
Thank you.
Excellent
Good
job.
driving.
Kevin.
Hey guys. Had a lot of fun.